Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, we'll see a very famous game played by two of the former world champions, Tigran Petrosian and Vasily Smyslov, at the 28th Soviet Chess Championship in 1961. This game has been included as being one of the most instructive chess games of all times. Let's see how the game went. It started out in a solid style with c4, English, opening, knight c3, and knight f3. Here black would have a chance to choose to transpose to a queen's gambit type of position by playing d5, or try to play the symmetrical English by playing c5, but in this case Smyslov chose to play b6, offering to white to transpose to a queen's Indian defense, and that's the road that Petrosian chose. Another option here for white is to play e4 right away, but that's a whole other story. d4 is what happened in the game, and now bishop to b7, and here a move that I believe actually is a pet move or variation of Petrosian. In fact, it is often called as the Petrosian variation. And it's a very quiet and peaceful move. It's a preventive move that's so typical of Petrosian's style. He played a3. Obviously, the purpose of this move is to prevent the black bishop from coming to b4 and to pin the knight on c3. Of course, later in some cases, when white is trying to advance on the queen's side, white may play b4, and in that case, of course, the a3 move would come in handy anyway. At one time of his career, Garry Kasparov also used very frequently this setup for white against the queen's Indian defense, and quite successfully as well. In this position, d5 is perhaps the most popular move, the move that Smyslov chose in the game, and white captures, and here black has two main roads, capturing with a pawn or with a knight. Just logically speaking, I do prefer capturing with a knight, because after pawn takes, I wouldn't be too thrilled to have that bishop on b7 locked up behind the pawn being on d5. But of course, it's not that simple, and it's quite playable with black also. So in this game, black captured with a knight, which is one of the main moves. There were hundreds and hundreds of grandmaster games played with this variation. And came e3 and bishop to e7. And now the game becomes rather interesting by white giving a check on b5. And this is one of those instances when normally I would say never give a check with a bishop there, as long as that can be blocked with a pawn move, such as in this case, pawn c7 to c6. Well, this is one of those exceptions because the black bishop is already on b7, and therefore, if the pawn from c7 moves to c6, it will stand in the bishop's way, and therefore most likely that pawn will need to waste time as well in moving from c6 to c5, just like the white bishop does after being attacked, needing to retreat to d3. But we'll see that in a minute, because that's exactly how the game continued. Let's stop for a moment and see what would happen if instead black would block with a different piece. Well, if black would right now block with a knight on c6, that would already be, out of principle, a bad idea. And why is that? It's because black had moved into a pin. Generally speaking, as much as you can avoid, try not to do that. In this particular case, black would suffer immediate damage because white would be able to go after the pinned piece by playing knight to e5, attacking black's knight on c6 a second time. And the only way black can protect that knight is by playing queen to d6, and then white can chase away the queen, the defender of the knight, by playing knight to e4, and at this point black cannot avoid losing material. Let's go back and see why, on the other hand, it would not be a good idea to block the check with a knight on d7. Well, in general, for the same reason, because the knight again moved into a pin. In this case, white would trade first on d5. Let's say the pawn recaptures, and again the knight appears on e5 using the pin, attacking the pinned piece, and the only move that can protect the knight without giving up a pawn or a piece immediately is bishop to c8, but that actually at the end of the day gives up even more because the poor black queen is smothered, and after knight c6 it's lost. Relatively the best what black can do in this situation is to play c6, but that's of course is also giving up a pawn. Okay, let's go back to the game and see what happened. Black played the best and the most natural move, playing c6, attacking the white bishop. And the bishop simply retreated to d3. Well, you may ask, why didn't the white bishop go there in the first place? Why did white need to give that check? Well, he didn't need to, but it gave black options to go wrong without risking anything. Because as we'll see in the game, black played c5, and whether he does it right away or maybe in a few moves later, nevertheless, the deal is the same. White loses a move by moving first to b5 and then to d3, so does black by playing c6 first and then c5. So it's an even deal. And therefore, white didn't lose anything, black didn't lose anything, but along the way, black had options to go wrong. One of the masteries in chess is to give your opponent as many opportunities to go wrong as possible. And that is, of course, without gambling, without taking unnecessary chances, but just kind of with normal moves like we saw in this case. White didn't risk anything, didn't lose anything, and nevertheless, black had to be rather careful to avoid falling into traps. And in this position, Petrosian continued by trading knights immediately on d5. Again, black would have an option to capture back with the pawn. The drawback of that is pretty clear, that it locks up the bishop on b7, but it may have been the better choice than taking back with the queen. Now in this case, the fact that the queen is out early is not a significant problem because white no longer has a knight that could handily develop and attack the queen. So it's not a problem from that perspective. Let's see how white continues. White traded pawns with d takes c5. Now the problem is that the black king hasn't castled yet. And as we'll see, that causes tactical difficulties for black. Right away in this position, the first problem that black faces is that if, for example, the bishop would capture back on c5, white would immediately gain significant strategical advantage by giving a check, and now either black needs to move the king, which obviously would give up the right to castle, or block with either the bishop or the knight, and after either of them, white could trade queens, creating an isolated pawn for black. which is a clear target that white could go after, while in the meantime, white does not have any weakness, white does not have any target that black could conveniently attack. Therefore, sadly for black, the queen had to move again. And in this position, the queen took on c5 because of the previous variation that black wants to avoid having an isolated pawn on the d file. But we can already see the trouble that this causes. Now the queen is on the c file, which is a very likely place for the white rook from a1 to go to. All white needs to do, which they did, move the bishop to d2 and clear the c1 square for the rook. And then the poor queen will be on the road again. Well, in this position, I was analyzing a bit the position, and I was wondering why black did not castle right away. It's true that at first it seems a bit scary to allow bishop to b4, but after queen c7, I couldn't see how white immediately can take advantage of the situation. Let's go back. After bishop d2, black did not castle right away, but decided to develop the knight on the queen side. And came the most natural move, I bet you know what it is, rook to c1, attacking the queen. And queen went to d6, attacking the white bishop on d3. And now white protected the bishop by playing queen c2, which is a multi-purpose move. On one hand, it protected the bishop. On the other hand, it puts pressure on black's pawn on h7. It's especially a problem if black would like to castle at this moment, because then white, of course, could just simply take that pawn on h7. It may be a threat even at this position, because if black then would try to lock in the bishop by playing the typical g7, g6 move, white may just sacrifice the bishop on g6 and get 3 pawns for the bishop. In the meantime, black played rook to c8 with the idea to create a discovery jump with the knight from c6. Before we go any further, let's talk about a move like h6. Why didn't black play that? It's certainly a natural move to preparing castling. Well, here white can play really ambitiously. What is important in such situations is that, as they say, you have to hit the iron while it's hot. If black indeed gets the chance to simply castle and put their rooks on the c and d open files, black will have a completely fine position. So therefore, it's important to play actively and put black in front of challenges. Try to think of a move that's an active move and doesn't allow black just to follow his own plan, that is, to put the king in safety and activate his rooks. And white plays here bishop to b5, pinning the knight again and putting a threefold attack on the knight between the bishop, the queen, and the rook. Attacking and only 2 pieces defending. Now black has only one move to defend the knight, and that is to play rook to c8. And white has another piece that can come to the attack, and that is the knight. By playing knight e4, now this is the 4th white piece that puts pressure on the black knight that's in the pin. Although it's not quite over yet, black here has a very tricky move. By playing queen d5, black can set up a trick. And now, if white would try to win a piece by bishop takes knight, try to figure out what would be black's response to actually have a pretty good position. Namely, taking rook takes, and after knight takes, queen g2, all of a sudden counterattack, and it's white who is in trouble. The rook has only one safe square to go to, and now the sneaky bishop to a6 all of a sudden turns things around, and it's white who is in trouble. What a cute trick! Let's go back just a couple of moves and see how white should continue after queen d5. Certainly white is not forced to capture the knight immediately, and indeed they should not. White should play here simply castling. Protect that g2 pawn while black is still stuck with the problems they were in, that is, the pin. Bishop c5 would solve black's problems only very temporarily, because now white would do the trade of the minor pieces on c6, followed by using the newly created pin on the bishop this time by playing b4, and now black cannot avoid losing the bishop. A very nice variation. Let's go back again to queen to c2, and as I mentioned earlier, black here rather played rook c8. Was kind of needed. And here white simply castled. It's quite important to have all our pieces available for the action. And here black already did play h6. Instead, black has another very tempting looking option, and that is to play knight to e5, which is a discovery. It attacks the white queen, the white bishop, and the white knight on f3 all at once. However, white has several intermediate moves that can get white out of the immediate trouble. One check is to play bishop b5, get the bishop out of the trouble, and the other one would be to give the check with the queen. Both are quite interesting, and let's look at first what happens after bishop b5. This is quite tricky because the black king cannot go to f8 right now, and I suggest you stop for a moment and figure it out for yourself. Why not? And the answer here is queen takes rook. Bishop takes, rook takes, and after the bishop block, all of a sudden bishop b4, and black is in trouble. However, after bishop to b5, let me put the pieces back. After knight e5 and bishop b5 check, black is much better off playing king d8, protecting the rook with the king as well. At this point, I believe white's best option would be, still surprisingly, to sacrifice the queen and then follow up by playing bishop to b4, knight takes f3, pawn takes, and the queen needs to remain on the d file, otherwise things got even worse after rook f to d1 check, rook f to d1, bishop b4, rook takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, and I believe white still may have a slight advantage here. However, I believe it's better to give the other check after knight e5, that is, to give the queen check on a4. And now the best move for black is to block with the bishop and then to play bishop to b5. Again, the black bishop is in a dual pin, on one hand on the diagonal, on the other hand on the c file. And now after knight takes f3, g takes f3, bishop takes b5, rook c8, king d7, queen b5, king c8, and rook c1, followed by bishop b4, gives white an advantage. Okay, let's go back to the game. And in this position, black, as I said, played h6, trying to castle, and white plays rook f to d1. Now this is a very interesting type of position with symmetrical pawn structure and most of the pieces still on the board. One of the key things in such position is whose queen gets to be in a better position. And we'll see very soon, after black castled and white played bishop c3, that the black queen somehow doesn't get a very optimal square. Obviously, it cannot remain on the d file in the discovery threat, because white is threatening to just play bishop h7 and win the queen. Staying on the c file is also rather dangerous, because once the white queen moves away, the other white bishop may also have a discovery, and therefore the poor queen ended up all the way on b8. Believe me, I bet you that Smyslov was not happy when he had to move his queen there. The other problem of just being on an ugly square is that basically the queen is very far from the king, and it takes a long time to get back. And that usually is a sign that it's a good idea to try to develop an attack. And this is a very key moment of the game where white needs to make a concrete plan. Because so far, white made just normal, logical moves, developing, putting their rooks on the open files, kind of used common sense. But this is the critical moment when white needs to make an actual plan. How to improve the position of the pieces, or where is the weakness in the opponent's position. Okay, on one hand we know the queen is kind of misplaced on b8, but that's not a weakness in itself. It's a misplaced piece, but that's not a target to attack. The target is the black king, because it does not have a knight on f6 defending it, and the queen is far away. Now, we know that's black's weakness. White already has two beautiful bishops pasting over black's king side. But how do we actually concretely create threats? Well, the key move here is playing queen a4. It's a very simple looking move, but in reality it has a lot of poison to it. Black played rook f to d8, and now white starts a tour to weaken black's position further. Game queen e4. Well, the threat is rather clear. The queen wants to come to h7, and black is forced to weaken himself by playing g6. And now queen g4, following up on it. If black right now would play king h7, defending, white would be ready to crash with bishop g6, followed by queen takes e6 with checkmate threat immediately on f7, and after rook f8, rook d7, white's attack is absolutely devastating. For example, after rook c to e8, white has a forced checkmate in 5 moves. Can you see it? Here it comes. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5. Very nice checkmate. Let's go back again. After queen g4, black played h5, chasing the queen up again. However, this further weakens black's king side. The queen moved back to h3, and now white's plan is, for example, after a move like rook d6, which would intend to protect the e6 pawn against the bishop g6 sacrifice, now white is absolutely ready for action to play g4. And for example, after rook c to d8, white can ignore the threat to the bishop, take on h5, rook captures d3, Rook captures d3, rook captures, pawn takes, queen h8, and now is white's attack over? Not at all. Now the sneaky and tricky knight e5 check all of a sudden wins the black queen, because if knight takes knight, then queen takes queen. Another elegant variation. Let's go back again and see how the game continued. After queen h3, black responded by playing f5. Looks pretty sad, moving so many pawns in front of the king. But again, white needs to continue playing energetically, otherwise black may get away. Came bishop c4, putting pressure on the pawn, and black traded rooks and played king f7, protecting the pawn. And now, of course, in such positions, white's goal has to be immediately to open the position, which they did by playing e4, threatening to take on f5, and then either on h5 or using the pin and just capture on f5 a second time. Came queen f4, protecting. And here white has two good moves. One looks more ambitious by playing rook d7, but the other one is also very powerful, what Petrosian chose, rook e1. The idea is simple: to open the e file by capturing on f5 and then to have a dual pressure on e6. Black was hoping to trade queens, which would solve a lot of the problems. Of course, king safety would not be an issue if the queens would be off the board. The problem is tactics. Black never gets there. White is able to sacrifice the bishop on c4, because now pawn takes on g6. If king takes, then rook e6, king f7, and now probably the easiest way to win is just play rook c6, and then black gets into a fork with knight e5. Let's go back again and see how the game continued. Black played king e8, and the g-pawn all of a sudden runs away. e5, trying to stop the promotion square with the queen, and queen takes pawn, king d7, rook d1, bishop d6, bishop e5, and here, instead of resigning, black tried the last trick in the game, playing knight d4, see if by any chance white would touch the rook and capture the knight, which would allow a queen c1 check. But instead, of course, white captured with a knight, and then Smyslov resigned. A very instructive and very nice game. And finally, the jewel of the week. And here we go. This position has been played in a real game between two international masters, Horvat and Eperjesi, back in Hungary in 1971. Black is a whole rook ahead, and it seems that white may as well just resign. However, white has an amazing checkmate in 4. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Figure out the solution. And here's the answer. Queen take, rook takes, knight takes, knight check, king has to move to the corner, and voila, the beautiful two-knight checkmate. Well, I hope you enjoyed this beautiful combination, as well as the very instructive game that showed you ways how to provoke a weakness and how important king safety is. Try not to put yourself in a situation where you'll need to weaken the position in front of your king, because then trouble is arriving. Thank you for listening, and so long until next week.